And I'm going to hit a little cue-in music. So,
The Guyana Business Journal and the Caribbean Policy Consortium presents Transforming Guyana. In each episode, Dr. Blackman and Dr. Lewis will tackle a different area of interest for transforming Guyana.
good morning, colleagues, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 3 of Transforming Guyana, hosted by the Guyana Business Journal and the Caribbean Policy Consortium. I'm Terrence Blackman, Chair and Associate Professor of Mathematics at Medgar College in the City University of New York and founder of the Guyana Business Journal. And as usual, I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. David Lewis of the Caribbean Policy Consortium and Manchester Trade Incorporated in Washington, D.C. Today's webinar, titled Powering the Future, an analysis of Guyana's energy landscape and its role in fostering economic and environmental progress, will delve into some of the critical issues surrounding Guyana's energy development. As many of you have asked, the Guyana Business Journal is dedicated to catalyzing a stronger, more inclusive and prosperous Guyana by championing equitable opportunities, fostering a thriving democracy, and advocating for the fair distribution of economic growth. In this series, we aim to foster dialogue between experts, amplify diverse perspectives, and chart a sustainable path forward for Guyana, ensuring that all citizens benefit from the nation's growth, particularly in the context of its evolving energy sector. Today, we're pleased to welcome some real experts. First, I want to introduce to the audience Dr. Anthony Bryan, distinguished academic and researcher with extensive experience in the field of international relations and Caribbean studies. He's a senior research fellow at the Institute of International Relations at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus in Trinidad and Tobago. I should say that Dr. Bryan has made significant contributions to the understanding of geopolitical dynamics in the Caribbean and Latin America, focusing on energy security, regional integration, and economic development. Dr. Bryan holds a doctoral degree in international relations and has held various academic positions at prestigious institutions, including visiting professorships and fellowships. His deep understanding of the geopolitical landscape, combined with his commitment to the development of the Caribbean region, makes him a leading voice in the field. Milton Chavez is a highly accomplished professional with over 3 decades of experience in corporate, public, and government affairs, particularly within the oil and gas industry and the United States government. Throughout his distinguished career, Mr. Chavez has held pivotal roles, most notably with ExxonMobil, where he's led strategic initiatives across the Western Hemisphere. His assignments have included leadership positions such as the Government Relations Director for ExxonMobil in Venezuela, the Upstream Public Affairs Manager for Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Government Affairs Director for the Americas. In these roles, Mr. Chavez has excelled in building relationships, driving commercial diplomacy, and navigating complex geopolitical landscapes. Mr. Chavez has also served more than 20 years with the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Department of Commerce. He was the senior commercial advisor to the U.S. Embassy in Venezuela, where he oversaw major projects and managed energy and trade promotion portfolios. His contributions are recognized with numerous awards from both the U.S. and Venezuelan governments, as well as accolades from industry organizations. I should say he holds a BA in Business Administration from Lycoming College and an MBA from Universidad Central de Venezuela. And he serves as a consultant for the US and Mexico based corporations and holds a board membership with CBMEX Energy in Guyana and the Mexican Institute of Greater Houston. His expertise is extensive, and the strategic insights that he continues to proffer make him a respected leader in the field. Dr. David L. Goldwyn is renowned, many of you know him, you've heard him on PR, is a renowned expert in the energy policy, international affairs, and strategic communications. Distinguished career spanning over 3 decades in both public and private sectors. He's the founder and president of Goldwyn Global Strategies, LLC, a premier international energy advisory consultancy specializing in energy security, market analysis, and policy development. Mr. Goldwyn has held significant positions in the U.S. government, including serving as the U.S. State Department's Special Envoy and Coordinator for International Energy Affairs under Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And in this role, he led the formulation and implementation of U.S. international energy policy, advancing global energy security and sustainable energy practices. He was also the Assistant Secretary of Energy for International Affairs, where he managed and developed the U.S. energy relationships worldwide. Mr. Goldwyn is a prolific speaker, author, and has contributed to many of the leading publications and forums on energy security and policy. He holds a JD from New York University Law and a BA from Harvard. His work continues to shape the global discourse on energy, making him one of the more influential voices in the field. And then our final guest for today is someone who many of you know very well. I think of him as the sort of dean of Guyanese academics, Dr. Ulrich Trotz, respected environmental scientist, leading authority on climate change in the Caribbean, a career that has been dedicated to addressing the impacts of climate change in the region. Dr. Trotz formerly served as the science advisor to the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. And in that capacity, he played a pivotal role in guiding the center's research agenda, policy recommendations, and regional climate adaptation strategies. Dr. Trotz's expertise spans over 5 decades, and he has been instrumental in the development of climate resilience frameworks and the implementation of sustainable environmental practices across the Caribbean. His work has significantly contributed to the region's understanding of climate variability, disaster risk management, and the socioeconomic implications of climate change. I should note, because it's important, before his tenure at the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, Dr. Trotz held various senior positions in academia and public service, including serving as the Director of Science and Technology Division at the Caribbean Community Secretariat, the CARICOM Secretariat. He's been a key figure in numerous international climate negotiations representing the interests of Caribbean nations on the global stage. And for good measure, Dr. Trotz holds a doctoral degree in chemistry and has authored numerous papers on climate science and policy. And his contributions have earned him recognition as a leading voice in the fight against climate change. And he remains a vital advocate for the Caribbean's sustainable development and environmental stewardship. And I should add one personal note on this. One of Dr. Trotz's books, which I have always found really remarkable, was a book on plant life, plants of Guyana, and describing the various medicinal properties properties of a large number of plants. And I've always thought that that book should be the basis for an entire school of agriculture in Guyana. So I want to welcome you, colleagues, to the Transforming Guyana series. And I suppose, having properly introduced our distinguished guests, let me ask my co-host, Dr. David Lewis, to bring a few words of welcome from the Caribbean Policy Consortium. David?
Thank you, Terence. Good morning, everybody. Our distinguished invited speakers today. Thank you for joining us, and everybody joining us on the virtual internet networks. I'll be very quick because I think we've got a full package today, and everybody wants to listen to our colleagues and the experts on this really important discussion. We are in year 3 of our webinar series on Guyana, but I remind people that we're now year 5 and going into 6 since the advent of first oil in Guyana, and of course the growth of this new energy economy, not only in the energy sector, but overall throughout the rest of the economy, the impact on services in the economy, diversification of various sectors, the growth rates, and of course the challenges and opportunities this brings, both at the public policy level, but also government, civil society writ large. You'll receive after today's session an email I penned late last night regarding the announcement that the government needs 100,000 skilled workers to fill in the current gaps in this massive growth economy, depending on who you listen to and what day of the week. 35% GDP growth per year. Some years it hit the 50-point plus rate and so on. And one of the key things, and this was an issue that's been discussed in our webinars and events various times already, was the government mentioning 100,000 Guyana diaspora. And of course, I was quick to point out, and you'll see in the email, well, if you're focusing on just trying to get diaspora, it ain't going to work, because the economics of the labor market, where the diaspora lives, and in Guyana, and just the mathematics of it, our professor and host Blackman can tell us more about that, just won't add it up in terms of the skilled sectors of people. If you want 100,000 people to return to Guyana, that's something variable. But to fill in that labor gap, just like many other countries in the world, Guyana is going to have to tap into global human resource skills markets. And that will mean that you have to look for international labor on that. And I think that's really a key element in terms of that. And it's a cue for my point regarding, since day one in our programs, the opportunity and the challenge with this new growth energy economy for Guyana to develop what I consider should be the number one most advanced, cleanest, efficient, effective, technologically modern, and sustainable utility to be able to service 24/7 efficient and cost-effective power to all Guyanese and all economic activities in Guyana. At the end of the day, no matter how great and how big the oil and gas growth becomes, if that cannot be delivered, it will be seen as a failure by the majority of the Guyanese people. So that is something I just want to leave that there with our guests in terms of how it all fits in. And in the world of the 21st century, we're going into 2025 with the gas to energy project and the various other initiatives. What are the prospects for being able to have that utility developed in Guyana to service those needs and to function effectively 24/7, like everybody else in the 21st century global economy expects to have? So, Terence, let me shut up with that, and let's move on with the meat of the program this morning. Thank you again.
Thank you, David. So now to the meat of the program, and our first speaker is Professor Anthony Bryan, and I've already given a great introduction, and so I just we wanted someone to set the context, and so we've asked Professor Bryan to sort of speak on energy development for Guyana's future, and more broadly, I suppose, in the context of the regional context. So, Professor Bryan, the floor is yours.
I can't see myself, but I imagine I'm on.
Yes, you're on. We can't see you. Dude, maybe the camera's gone someplace.
Oh, well, I don't know. Well, anyhow, you can hear me, right?
We can hear you.
Hear you.
Yeah, that's fine. Yes.
All right. Well, to put things in context, you asked me to stress the importance of energy development for Guyana's future. This is a problematic thing, you know. Guyana's reserves are vast. They are estimated at 11 billion barrels of recoverable oil, one of the highest levels per capita worldwide. By 2027, Guyana will produce more than 1 million barrels of oil daily, and its annual earnings from the sector could be about US 10 billion by 2030. Now, dealing with this windfall is a new experience for the Guyanese government and its people. Until the first discovery, Guyana had no known oil reserves. Now it is racing to provide the necessary legislation, to create the institutional structures, and to devise strategies to manage an oil economy. Now, the oil experience of Guyana, the oil industry, is in its infancy. So it's a work in progress. And the discoveries and the production are rapid. But so alarmingly is the global media hyperbole that is accompanying the boom. Now, when you have this largesse dumped on you overnight, there is a risk that the population can become frustrated by not receiving any immediate tangible benefits that they may have expected from oil revenue. I mean, here's a case of a country of 800,000 people. Its infrastructure is still somewhere in the early 20th century. It has, a massive amount of people that live actually below the poverty line. So managing public expectations is critical. Or you're going to create a crisis of expectations. It can have a negative impact on the country's ability to meet its goals. As we know, the possibility of political and ethnic strife is a constant threat if the benefits of the windfall are not distributed evenly among the various groups. But here's the good news. Guyana is not slowing down on its oil and gas exploration and production. In fact, it's auctioned off 14 coveted oil blocks during 2023 in its first ever government-regulated onshore licensing round. So it is the government's responsibility to ensure that the country has all the contractual provisions in place to earn its fair share of the windfall. When you look at this in totality, the point is that the impact of the oil and gas windfall on Guyana's economy can be convulsive. It will grow exponentially. It may become one of the world's richest nations per capita. The big question is, can it avoid the dreaded resource curse, aka the paradox of plenty? Now, I think managing this windfall presents many challenges. In anticipation of expanded revenues, the government has established a sovereign wealth fund known as the National Resource Fund, the Natural Resource Fund. This is intended to capture royalties and other revenues from the oil and gas sector. The fund will use natural resource wealth to finance national development priorities, including initiatives to realize an inclusive green economy. So surging oil revenue will give the government an opportunity to close budget financing gaps, avoid debt accumulation, retire expensive outstanding public debt. It could also help address development needs and buffer the economy. But the trouble is that Ghana can still plunge itself into more debt. Budget financing needs to be monitored. Savings must not be eroded. The country could also face volatile oil prices, a slowing global economy, difficulties in managing the resource wisely. So I think the essential hallmarks of management, and this is where Guyana is important to the energy development in the world. It must be accountability, realistic development targets, opportunities for capacity building, and incentives that allow the Guyanese people to benefit the most from their oil wealth. Now, I think just to conclude, there are positive signs that Guyana is going in the right direction. Globally, investment is slowing down in new oil provinces, but Guyana's light sweet crude is an exception to this trend. Its energy-related resources are attracting a lot of investment. There are also investment opportunities in the non-oil sectors as well. Guyana has a regional advantage given its holistic approach to sustainable destination management and development from its national policy for pursuing low carbon development strategy. So I think Guyana has attributes that make it a regional energy and transition leader. And this is the importance, I think, of Guyana for regional success. Its forests have created an environmental space for the simultaneous development of its oil resources and its net carbon sink credentials. While it may appear to be in a contradictory position as a current victim of climate change and would seem to be an actor in exacerbating the problem, Guyana could become a major supplier of fossil fuels that uses the money from its oil and gas resources to facilitate its transition and that of the CARICOM region to net zero status. So together with Trinidad and Tobago and Suriname and others, it should capitalize on its prominence to influence the international agenda towards climate change mitigation. Now, finally, I think its cheap energy can compete internationally for industrial capacity in tandem with similar regional producers. The architecture of global energy systems is changing. New collaborative circular partnerships and new technologies, such as carbon capture, could alter the energy supply of the future. So, to put a cap on all of this, Guyana is important in terms of showing the world that this southern largesse can produce good results. And secondly, that Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, and other Caribbean countries should capitalize on these changes for the good of the region. And the region has the capacity to do so. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was, I think that was an effective kind of introduction, setting the context for what we're aiming at today. I think that you've raised two issues which are really vital, sort of the trying to simultaneously develop the fossil fuel resources, and I underline the word and, affect the sort of transition that is, this is sort of existential environmental challenge that we face. I want to bring Milton Chavez in. Professor Brian has talked about this changing architecture of the global energy systems, and within that context, I wanted you to speak from your perspective to the, sort of broad Guyana's energy resources and possible recent investment and potential for investments. Milton Chavez.
Okay, thank you. I think we have some slides. Can you project them, please?
So let me see. I actually didn't get them, so I thought that, let me just quickly check and see. I thought perhaps going without them.
I think you and David got him.
Okay. Let me check my. Okay, great. I did. Okay, so let me just load these up for you. No. Yeah. So let me add this to our mix. Is that? Yeah. And I'll have them up there. Sorry about that. I actually looked earlier and I didn't see them. So I thought perhaps you were no longer
okay.
Getting them. Yeah. So there you are.
Okay. Well. First of all, good morning to everyone, and thank you to the Guyana Business Journal and the Caribbean Policy Consortium for inviting us to talk a little bit about the existing energy resources and infrastructure in Guyana, as well as the recent strategic investments that are driving the country's energy future. Next, please. And if we look over here, according to OPEC, the world oil outlook global population will reach over 9 billion people by 2045, 2050. So in order to meet this global demand, the global energy landscape also grows and undergoes a significant transformation. And this is pretty much in what's something that Tony already mentioned and yourself. So the world is really shifting towards, if you look at that graph on the left-hand side, the middle one, by 2050, it's really shifting towards cleaner energy sources. But the need for reliable and affordable energy remains critical. Guyana, with its oil and gas discoveries in Stub Rock, will probably have definitely over 1 million barrels per day by the end of this decade. And it is quickly really emerging as a key player in the international energy market. Now, this growth is not just about fossil fuels. The good news is that Guyana is also making strides in diversifying its energy mix with renewables, positioning itself as a rising star in the global energy landscape. Next, please. Well, currently Guyana relies heavily on thermal power plants, and which are fueled by heavy fuel oil and diesel, making approximately 92% of the country's electricity generation. I think they continue to look for renewable energy sources like biomass, solar, and hydropower. And if you look on the center, about the industrial residential sector account for about 80% of electricity consumption. But the country's emerging consumption is gradually shifting, with renewable energy and natural gas expected to play a larger role in the coming years. However, this transition is still in the early stages, and so far, fossil fuel remains the dominant source of electricity. Next, please. On this electricity infrastructure connecting Guyana, we can see that Guyana's electricity infrastructure is really a critical component of its energy landscape. And if you see the country's main power plants, and we only listed 3, including Kingston, Freedom Hope, and the recently upgraded Garden of Eden, they're really fueled by heavy fuel oil and diesel. But again, these sources will be replaced by natural gas, will have a significant lower generation cost. But currently, together, these plants form the backbone of the national grid. And often development, and I see this in several countries, developing countries face challenges. And these challenges have to do with generation, transmission, and mostly transmission and distribution losses. But to address these issues, Guyana's directions are to diversify its energy mix and reduce carbon emissions, modernize its grid, reduce losses, and expand access to electricity, particularly in remote hinterland regions. Next, please. So over here, we have the renewable energy initiatives in Guyana, which is making strategic moves to harness renewable energy for significant initiatives in solar, hydropower, and biomass. As an example, the Mabaruma Solar Farm is a prime example of the country's commitment to solar energy, and they're leveraging abundant sunshine to generate clean electricity. Likewise, Amaila Falls hydropower project, though still in development, has the potential to be transformative and is really tapping into Guyana's vast water resources. So biomass is also being explored, utilizing agricultural waste to produce sustainable power. So with international partnerships, Guyana aims to source its energy largely from renewable sources by 2030. And that will mark a significant shift towards a greener future. Next, please. So when we look at unlocking Guyana's energy potential, it's really vast, and the country is already seeing the benefits of its oil and gas sector. Oil revenues, as Tony mentioned, have significant boosted the economy, enabling investment in infrastructure, healthcare, and social services. Obviously, all this takes time, energy, and they use a lot of human resources. So the development of the Stabroek Block has been a game changer with projects like Lisa Phase 1 and 2 and Payara and Yellowtail driving economic progress. Additionally, the gas to energy, which Frank Goldwyn will talk about, will utilize natural gas to generate electricity, reduce reliance on imported fuels, and lower electricity cost. But as Guyana navigates this rapid growth, it is focusing on sustainable development, ensuring that the environmental impact is managed in such a way that the wealth is generated and distributed equitably. Next, please. Recent investments in Guyana energy sector are fueling its transformation. Over $20 billion have been invested by major energy companies like ExxonMobil to develop the Stabroek Block. And at the same time, parallel investments are being made in renewable energy, such as the 7.6 million IDB funded solar initiative, which is beginning to diversify or continue to diversify the country's energy mix. So public and private partnership is also playing a critical role in financing infrastructure upgrades, including the 300 megawatt natural gas power plant and grid modernization efforts. These investments are really crucial for enhancing energy security and ensuring long-term sustainability. I didn't include this over here, but obviously, in addition to the bid rounds, which is probably attractive to foreign investors, there is also a lot of non-oil infrastructure being in the works currently. Like there are bridges, there are schools, there are roads, highways, hospitals, We recently read about the number of hotels that are coming in. So there's a lot of work going on. So I assume that all the construction companies there are pretty busy. Next, please. But as I had mentioned before, and I think Dave Lewis mentioned this at the beginning, in order to assist the country's long-term energy development, qualified, skilled, and forward-looking human resources are really critical to have a successful journey. So in addition to operating and service companies that count on their normal in-house training, there are well-established Guyanese educational and training institutions and NGOs that have entered into MOUs with foreign universities and international organizations to expand their offerings in a wide range of tailored courses, aim at strengthening and reconverting the human capital required in the energy sector. You probably see that some slides have on the bottom, on the right-hand side, the CBMEX Energy Guyana, which is a company that relies on years of experience in Mexico's energy sector. This organization has cooperative efforts with such institutions as the University of Guyana and the Guyana Oil and Gas Energy Chamber. And the idea is to together put courses to enrich the lives of Guyanese human capital through tailored and specialized education training. Well, given my years of experience in the US government and international oil and gas sector, I have witnessed that in addition to partnerships with governments, international companies value human resources and welcome the development of local companies to safely and timely meet their goals in operations, production of hydrocarbons in order to generate revenues for the country and stakeholders. So with that, I think I will finish my presentation. We'll be ready to help out on the later panels.
Now, I think you've sketched out really nicely, kind of, where the energy sector is in Guyana at this moment. But I think you end on a very critical slide. And as I've read the comments that have been coming in, they've really been focused on this critical role of human capital. And in some sense, it leads to David Goldman's sort of remarks. I mean, the one of the challenges around the sort of gas to energy initiative in Guyana has been one of the issues that has emerged has been, do we have the capacity to effectively manage this enterprise? Is it going to work? And so I mean, you're far away, but offer your perspective in general on these matters, and perhaps provide us some thoughts, insights for the future. David.
Oh, great. Thanks. Well, first, Dr. Blackman, Dr. Lewis, thank you for inviting me. I've been following your webinar for some time, and I think given the tremendous development in Guyana, it's really important to have a deep dive on the issues of business structure, business development, and investment, and to flush out that debate. So a real pleasure to be invited and to be with old colleagues like Milton and new colleagues like Dr. Bryant and Dr. Trotz. So I've been asked to talk about this Guyana gas to energy project. Let me just level set first. This is for those who are not familiar with it, it is a project to take associated gas from the Liza oil development to an integrated gas processing facility on the west bank of the Demerara. So Exxon is going to be responsible for building the pipe from the FPSOs to the shore. That's about $1 billion project. It's a 12-inch, 200-kilometer pipe, more or less, with 50 million cubic feet a day of capacity, but the possibility to go up to 120 million cubic feet a day. It's going to feed two facilities, really, a natural gas liquids processing plant and a 300 megawatt combined cycle gas-fired plant. The gas is going to first come from the Unity FPSO, then Destiny. There's plenty of gas to run this project for the foreseeable future. The government is responsible for the integrated gas processing facility, and that's about a $750 million project. So I think Exxon is expected to complete the pipeline build by the end of this year. There have been some contract disputes between the government and the builder, but it looks like that facility will be delivered in the second half of 2025. And it's going to be a very significant project. It's going to, as you saw from Milton's slide, the government has installed capacity, not necessarily operating capacity, of about 325 megawatts. It's almost going to double the power generation capacity for Guyana. And it's going to have a number of collateral benefits too. I mean, one is that power is now coming from kerosene and diesel, which, as the rest of the Caribbean knows, is extremely expensive. So you're going to have reliable power. It's going to cost less. The government's not going to be using foreign exchange money to buy imported diesel. It's going to be significantly lower emissions. And then these natural gas liquids, will either be used for domestic consumption for Guyana's growing economy, or potentially for export. But there's going to be domestic demand for these products, which all now have to be imported. There's been some criticism about this project. Is it too expensive? Does Guyana really need it? Should it just be using 100% renewables? And these are questions that you see take place across the Caribbean. When the question is, how quickly can we get to net zero? How quickly can we implement a low carbon development strategy? But the realistic answer for baseload energy, and I think Milton pointed this out as well, is that first you need baseload, and then you need renewables. It is hard to, without significant storage, to get 24/7 power from renewable energy. Although in places like in the hinterlands, places not connected with transmission lines, you're talking renewable energy is an excellent solution. Government has a plan for significant installation of rooftop solar, where you're talking about some electricity versus no electricity, or versus these diesel-fired generators where you have to truck the fuel all the way inland. So I think these criticisms are misplaced. With renewables, it is not an either-or story of gas versus renewables. The government has a low carbon development strategy. It's going to have both, but it's going to take time. But the main question here really is a development one. And we've seen this really around the world. First, as I think almost all of our speakers have pointed out, Guyana is going to come out of cost recovery in 2027. It's going to be earning significant revenues, $10 billion a year, maybe more, depending on where global prices are. And it's going to have an investment boom. But in all countries, if you're going to have more schools, more hospitals, more manufacturing capacity, if you're going to not have everything be crowded into the capital and make the capital too expensive for everyone, and you're going to build into the interior of the country, you have to have two things. You have to have roads and you have to have power. And if power is a lagging development, people are not going to build, and they're not going to be able to operate until they know they're going to have access to reliable electricity. You've got to have roads first, and you've got to have electricity first. So the idea that this will be in place a year from now, and that new developments coming into Guyana will know that they will have some access to reliable energy, will really be critical to accelerating the country's development. And everything else that we're seeing in the chat, development of agriculture, development of human capital, development of education, all of that is going to depend on having access to reliable electricity. The digitalization of the economy that the government has been talking about requires electricity as well. And you will have build out of renewables in addition, but this is really baseload. So I think it's really an indispensable project. Also, I've done a lot of work on the resource curse. I wrote a book called Drilling Down for Revenue Watch a few years ago, and seen a lot of these problems take place. I have a few suggestions for how Guyana can beat the resource curse, which I'm putting into the chat now, based on a visit I took down there. But we've seen a couple of problems when you don't have adequate baseload. So in countries like Bangladesh, where they actually have gas and some coal, you've got a fuel oil monopoly, and you've got self-supply of electricity, and the utility is bankrupt. It can't invest in transmission. It can't invest in new generation, gets bailed out periodically, and you have chronic instability in the economy. Mexico is a different case. Mexico, because it didn't have enough money to provide adequate generation, allowed a lot of self-supply. So all of the high-paying reliable customers in the country provide their own electricity. And now you have this battle between the utility and providers of renewable energy and self-supply, because the government feels like it can't finance its job to provide residential electricity because it doesn't have the high-paying customers, and it's trying to force out renewable energy to preserve old, high-emitting energy because it can't manage the fiscal situation. So you want Guyana to have a strong utility. You want businesses to rely on the utility for electricity, not to rely on self-supply. And that means they're going to rely on cleaner electricity, but also they're going to be paying for their electricity. They're going to pay the utility. And the utility will then have money to build out the grid and to bring in more generation and to diversify the supply. And I mean, this is a challenge that you see really across the Caribbean. I'm going to put another study we did at the Atlantic Council on a roadmap for the Caribbean's energy transition into the chat. But you have utilities that have been long dependent on fuel oil and kerosene, and they're responsible for energy security. And so you can't say, how would you like to invite some competition and put yourself out of business? That's not realistic. So you have to restructure the utilities. You have to find a way to bring them into the process so you can introduce renewables, you can reduce emissions, you can increase resilience and reliability. But it's incredibly difficult when you have an archaic system. So Guyana has this opportunity to build the system right from the beginning. And I think this gas to energy project is really going to be critical for that. And so I think for those that are worried about whether it will meet its low carbon development strategy, I would say really you don't need to worry. It's going to be both and particularly in the rural areas, it's probably going to be significantly renewable energy, because you're not going to build a national grid with transmission out across the country without this development. So you're going to have distributed generation. So it's both and, but Guyana needs to launch. It needs to launch all this development. And right now it has fantastic plans on paper. But the implementation of those plans, from local content to building roads to all of the financing it has, all those plans are yet to be worked out. All those details have to be worked out between now and the next few years, when the very significant funds come in. Having electricity in place and having roads in place are going to enable all of that to happen. But if you don't have that, you have a big battle over that. Everything is going to wait for the lights to go on and for electricity to be there before people start building out. So I think it's a critically important project. I think it'll get underway by the end of 2025, and it will be probably the most important enabler of Guyana's development of any of the projects that are going on right now. So let me stop there.
No, I think you make a very important point, that I mean, from a particular perspective, it is indeed the most important enabler of Guyana's development. And I think the point that you make, which is one that quite often is not taken heed of, is the fact that the energy supply can't lag, because there's no way that I'm going to make an investment if there is no energy with which to make that investment. And so I think it's one of the points that is often missed in the debate. But I'll say the following, and I want to invite Dr. Trotz to come into the mix at this moment. He seems to be muted. I'm not sure if he's still there.
I am.
Your camera is you see that, because one of the issues I've often thought is that these plans on paper, they still don't kind of exhibit we still don't see in them that they're undergirded by the sort of environmental concerns for Guyana broadly. They're not, in a sense, undergirded by these concerns about the adaptability that is needed, the resilience that is needed. And we see many videos of, people being flooded away and so on. And so I wanted Dr. Trotz to kind of give us a sense of I think David is kind of, we have to have baseload before the renewables. But once we put our base load in place, how do we resiliently, how do we manage the sort of environmental domain effectively as we put the base load in place that will allow us to transition to these renewables? And so I'll give you the floor for giving us some sense of where this should unfold, or how it should unfold.
Well, good morning, colleagues. Yeah, I would first of all preface what I have to say by more or less defining a generic sort of approach to the whole GTE project. We have to look at it in a couple of phases: the pipeline construction, then the onshore facilities construction for processing, and for the actual energy production. And all of these require proper planning, and I must say rigorous environmental and social impact assessments. And finally, through that, the implementation of best practices to mitigate the environmental risk associated with GTE plants. Just a quick word about environmental impact assessments. They had its origin when we started to become concerned about environmental degradation as a result of development. So countries were asked to carry out environmental impact assessments. Then we saw that these projects had impacts on communities, their social issues. So now we carry out environmental and social impact assessments. And finally, with the advent of climate change, there was a slight paradigm shift, because rather than asking the generic question of what impact my development will have on the environment, we are now forced to ask what are the impacts of environmental issue on my development, which is climate change, which is of great concern. So let us look at the risk that we need to take account of. First, with the pipeline construction, there's the whole question of marine ecosystem disruption caused by, of course, disturbance of the environment, sediment plumes which reduce water quality, and habitat degradation, with the result of affecting fisheries through the ecological changes, and sometimes fisher folk having restricted access to traditional fishing grounds. The onshore with the infrastructure is the whole question of the impact on coastal ecosystems, your mangroves and your wetlands, ecosystems that act as buffers against coastal erosion, an important habitat for marine species or crabs, fish, shrimps, and the impact that will have on livelihoods of people who depend on that type of commodity for their living. The altering of natural landforms and potentially displacing local communities and disruption of livelihoods. Now, there is one specific issue I'd address with this plan. The government had more or less waived the ESIA for the plant in this specific location, and they use an ESIA that was done, and hopefully rigorously done, for another location. But there are certain location-specific issues, particularly as it relates to the communities in this new location, that need to be addressed. And one that spans both locations is the fact that there is land subsidence as a result of extraction of water from the aquifers. And this is something that needs to be, particularly with the pipeline, what impact will land subsidence over time have on the integrity of the pipeline? Then there's a whole amplification of the impact when combined with other industrial activities, offshore drilling, the construction of a shore-based facility at Vrena Hoop, which involved a lot of dredging and land reclamation. And of course, the bridging of the Demerara River, which is a major infrastructure project that, again, ESIA for that has been waived. So there is the threat of cumulative impact, which basically one needs to take into account as we move forward. Let's move quickly to the operation of the plant. Once the plant becomes operational, there are issues, of course, with the greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon dioxide from combustion, and the ever-present possibility of methane linkage. So we need to ensure that these are minimal and the carbon footprint concerns are taken into consideration. The important thing as far as communities are concerned are air pollution, nitrogen oxides emissions. These impact respiratory health in nearby communities. They also contribute the possibility to acid rain, which in a country that basically will have major agricultural activity, we need to be concerned about what is the likely impact on our agriculture. Volatile organic compounds, which result in air quality issues, and particulate matter in emissions with health risks, especially for people with respiratory issues. There are issues about water. There's a substantial supply of water will be required for cooling in the plant, and this may lead to a strain on local water supply for domestic use, for agriculture, and possibly for other industries in the area. Very important, the discharge of heated water into natural water bodies with a possible impact on temperature-sensitive species and water contamination with chemicals used in the process. So all these are risks that needed during an SIA. I would assume that those would have been identified and that mitigative actions would be integrated in the final design to take care of these risks. The plant infrastructure, the pipeline, the roads, all these can lead to habitat destruction and fragmentation with a consequent impact on things we don't worry about normally, which is local flora and fauna, but are really integral part in terms of a healthy existence in the community. Very important, and waste generation, solid waste, spent catalysts and filters, which can result in land and water contamination, and chemical waste, byproducts of the process, which can lead to further environmental contamination, and eventually, as we are concerned about its impact on human health. For the air and water quality, the nitrogen oxides and the other contaminants lead to respiratory and cardiovascular health issues, spills, leaks, and improper waste disposal can impact aquifer and water quality for domestic use and in agriculture. And of course, finally, the possibility of accidents. We're dealing with highly inflammable material and explosions, fires. One needs to make sure these are major risks that a lot of attention to be paid should be paid to these. Then the question of pipeline leaks leading to contamination of soil and water. So those are the major risks. And as I said, this is why ESIAs are so important. Those risks would have been identified because these are generic and to all operations of this type. And there is experience in how to mitigate those risks. Some of the mitigative actions one can take, emissions controls, for instance, installing some of the most advanced emission control technologies to reduce the nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds and particulate matter in emissions, and just reducing the health risks to communities. To employ robust leak detection and repair programs for methane and other gas leaks, and for water management, employing efficient water use practices that we see now in vogue, like recycling and cleaning and recycling, actually using the water after it's cleansed for agricultural purposes, and cooling technologies that lessen thermal pollution. And finally, it must be accompanied by regular monitoring, and this is something for the regulatory organization, to ensure that there's regular monitoring of the air, soil, and water quality around the plant to detect and mitigate any environmental impacts promptly, and developing and maintaining emergency response plans to manage potential accidents, explosions, and fires. In a capsule, there are risks, yes, but by careful attention to those risks, one can basically mitigate its impacts with proactive action in the design and in the very functioning of the facility. Again, proper planning, rigorous CSIS to identify risks and ensure that mitigative actions are included in the final design, and the implementation of best practices, and there are many of them around, for leak detection and repair, with water and waste management, and the reduction of the carbon footprint of the plant. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tross. I think many folks listening to are wondering if they can have you be a consultant to our EPA on this energy project. I think this exhaustive list that you've that you've sort of presented us with, I think is precisely the kind of concern that many of us have felt. That I think there's a genuine degree of support for this project, and I think for the reasons that David Golden mentioned, which is we've seen what the country looks like without power. The constant blackouts, the inability to have a real manufacturing sector, the inability to really drive the agricultural sector in some way. And the sense is that we need to have these roads, and we need to have this electricity in order to build out the country, in order to make the country work. But at the same time, we don't want to lose the country in a sense. We don't want to lose the green land of Guyana that we know, and with its vast flora and fauna, and in that sense, there is this tension, and perhaps perhaps we can bring everyone in at this moment. Maybe I wanted to sort of ask David if he wanted to sort of just give a little kind of summing up before we perhaps jumped into some of the questions that have been coming in, because there have been a large number of them sort of coming in, and we'll just have the conversation trigger from that. So David?
No, I'm good, Terence. I think we let's start giving a round to the speakers, because many issues have been raised, and I'm concerned about time. I'm good from my end right now, so go ahead.
Okay, very well. So, we had kind of wanted the panel discussion to kind of really focus on the sort of the role of these energy projects in national and regional growth. But the chat has been quite active, and so maybe I wanted to perhaps bring in some of the questions from the chat and use those as a mechanism for us to. So I wanted to sort of this is a thought that is also a kind of a serious thought about how this might work. I think, David, in your assessment, you said, look, there's enough gas for this thing to work for a long time. Some folks have actually thought about the lifespan of the Stabroek Block, and so thinking that perhaps there might be a more flexible solution in the long run than this strategy, given the lifespan of the SPSO, and to some of the concerns that Dr. Schwartz raised around, do we really need to put the pipeline there? I mean, is there another way to do this? I mean, the pipeline is already there, so there's no way to remove it at this moment. But certainly, I think abstractly thinking it through and at least offering something on the positive side is something that I don't know if anyone wants to take a stab at.
Sure.
Can I take a quick? I'm claiming a senior citizen privilege here, so let me say it before I forget. Anthony raised a question that I have had at the back of my mind, and is much at the forefront of my mind now that we've seen the fractious response of the CARICOM to the Venezuelan election. And that is, do we in CARICOM have a choice in terms of our future energy security to Petrocarib? Do we have the resources in the Guyana-Suriname basin and the infrastructure for processing in Trinidad and Tobago combined to satisfy the needs of the CARICOM countries for petroleum products as we move to a net zero situation, as we are all committed to? Do we need Petrocarib? Can we have an examination of what is required basically so that we can internalize that whole supply chain for petroleum products on the CARICOM and not be beholden to a Petrocarib agreement that has already placed a lot of our countries in a situation, a compromising situation, as we've seen recently as a result of their indebtedness? I'd like to leave that question open.
Can I jump in on that one? I've written a couple of papers for Atlantic Council on Petrocaribe, and I have a couple of thoughts I wanted to share. First, I mean, just to level set, Petrocaribe was more of a financing program than anything else. I mean, the Venezuelan government gave 20-year low-interest loans in order to enable Caribbean countries to buy oil or products at what for them were not subsidized rates. They were the market prices of the day, but it solved a fiscal problem for the recipients because of essentially it was creating these low interest loans, over a long period of time, which created the indebtedness that Ulrich was talking about. So I think in terms of the physical supply of products, whether that's oil or gasoline or diesel, there are plenty of other places where that supply can be gotten. In terms of the financing, I think, it was a challenge for governments and a risk for governments to essentially not be charging market rates to the consumers of petroleum products and to having the government subsidize that, incurring debt. So one way would be to have, the IMF or someone else come in to help governments transition off of those fossil products over time in exchange for an alternative subsidy. But also, Venezuela is really now not in any position to be offering that kind of financing anyway. So I don't know that PetroCaribe is really on offer. But the real solution for Caribbean countries is to transition off of dependence on diesel and kerosene. And given the size of many of the islands, even to consider electrification as a transportation alternative. But in order to have electrification as an alternative, you've got to solve the electricity problem. So this all comes back to the same issue, really, which is how do you provide adequate electricity, both for small islands and small economies. And it's really, I put the paper we just did last year on from Atlantic Council on the transition. It's really, it is very different for almost every island in terms of what that solution is. But it's not that much money. You're talking about $14 billion probably to transform the entire Caribbean economy. Now, no one's going to just write that check, without policy reforms. But transitioning, I think, is the answer, not the revival of PetroCaribe. I mean, if I can I was going to come back to the LNG question, which you put up earlier, if you'd like. But I think
so if you can, the question of the time frames for the Stabroek block and the time frame for the project and how these might not intersect in an appropriate manner. And then as you guys were speaking, this one came into, sort of saying does the gas to energy project play a role in impacting the broader Caribbean region's security and energy landscape? And so I thought I'd just add that there if there was a comment.
Well, I mean, I think David gave a good answer on LNG. I mean, there's two issues there with LNG versus piped gas. First of all, we're talking about supplying the domestic market. So having an LNG plants are really for export. And first, I don't think you really want to build an LNG export project off of associated gas. You really need more of a dedicated gas field, much larger for a long period of time, because those are multi-billion-dollar projects with 30-year lives. And then I think, as David pointed out, you've also got a lot of competition in the area, possibly an oversaturated LNG market, and the environmental disruption of an LNG plant versus a 12-inch pipe, along the seabed for 200 kilometers would be dramatically more impactful. So I think the business case just may not be there for LNG now. Now, in the future, if there are more large gas fields that are found, maybe so. But the LNG market itself is really in a very highly uncertain place. I guess what I was saying is, given the number of oil developments that are in line, even after Liza, and then Milton gave the whole list of them there on the Yellowtail and others, there'll be plenty of associated gas to supply the domestic market for a long period of time, but not necessarily an LNG market. But happy to more on that.
Professor Brian?
Yes. We think that Trinidad has 4 LNG trains that have been in operation for a number of years. And they export, LNG all over the world. So already the infrastructure exists in one Caribbean country, I think in Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic as well. So we have the infrastructure in a regional sense for that. The question is, of course, to pipe the gas, How do you pipe the gas from Suriname to Trinidad? It's possible. But most of us are aware of the current negotiations between Trinidad and Venezuela over the Dragon field and others. And in the Coquina Maturin field is also gas. That gas is vital, and hopefully somehow or the other that politics will not trump economics in the future, and we can see some of these deals going through. But I think it's quite possible that the infrastructure is there, and we need to capitalize on it, whether it's Trinidad, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico. They're all ready to do it.
So Milton, go ahead and then.
Yeah, I definitely concur with the positions that have been taken so far. I believe that definitely the GTE project and the electricity has to go first and foremost internally to see how much you can help the common person, whether it's his stove, his electricity, his internet. I think that's number one. Number two, I think they talked about the industrialization. Fine. We shouldn't forget that Guyana is also a mining country, and I could see Guyana in the future using the bauxite, building an alumina plant and then an aluminum smelter. After all, in those projects, about 30% of the cost of aluminum is simply energy, and you're going to have an energy country that could do that. So I just wanted to pitch on that. The other one is on the Caribbean, on the Petro-Caribe. Just concur with what was said, and I added that at the end of the day, it became a geopolitical instrument of a country, and you have to watch out how this goes, because that may play out. And at the end of the day, what you need is the income and the resources to fuel economic growth internally. In my opinion, the key challenge at the end of the day is balance the short-term economic growth with long-term sustainable development strategies and environmental considerations for Guyana. And I think they're thinking in that direction.
So I just wanted to note for Professor Trotz that someone who I guess I think that's Ambassador Samuel Hines, who I guess you shared the Chem Lab in the late 50s, and then the NSRC. It's completely an aside. Is this organization still the National Science Research? That's what it was called, right? The National
Science Research Council.
Yeah. Is it still operational? Do you know?
Not that I know of. No, not that I know of.
The IAST still is, though.
IAST still there. Yes.
Yeah, it would be good. I mean, some of the questions. I mean, it's interesting that as I saw that, I think some of the questions that we're sort of bandying about is precisely the kind of I served for 3 years on the American Mathematical Society's Committee on Science Policy, and one of the jobs that we did in that context was to visit Washington, and I became really aware of the Office of Technology and Science Policy at the White House. I've always thought that Guyana should have an Office of Technology and Science Policy. Some of these questions that are being raised require some proper ventilation from the inside out with some rigorous thinking, and it'd be good to have organizations like this in our current context to help us to better understand some of the challenges that we face. One question that has been coming in is this question about the gas energy project. Is there a linkage between the gas to energy landscape and the Caribbean region's energy? Are there plans for any connection between the gas energy program and the Caribbean?
There's been some talk of exporting the NGLs. And so that could be exported to the region, obviously short distances once you figure out who's marketing it. I mean, I just wonder how much domestic demand there's going to be for those products, given the growth that Guyana is going to see. There'll be a need for petrol, for all sorts of other chemicals, as you have, either a mining industry or for creation of fertilizer or for building domestic industries. So possibly you could export to the rest of the region, but my guess is that domestic demand is gonna take most of that up first.
So just an aside away from the gas to energy project, someone to the role of hydrogen in the electrification strategy for the Caribbean. Is there a place there for that?
There is a place for it, but it has to be green hydrogen. And I think Trinidad and Tobago, they were considering going in that direction. It is a possibility for the future. The generation of the hydrogen has to be, not using fossil fuels. It has potential.
I have to say we're struggling with this in the United States with the Inflation Reduction Act right now ourselves. Green hydrogen itself, is really important to use as a fuel for things which you cannot electrify. So steel manufacture, aluminum manufacture, sort of heavy industry. Other than that, it's cheaper to electrify everything because, of course, you have to make that hydrogen either by taking your renewable energy, which you might otherwise want for domestic consumption, and to power industries, and you've got to divert it away from the grid to manufacture hydrogen through some process, and then use that hydrogen fuel for something. So, right now there's a huge fight in the United States because no one really wants to divert, green power away from the grid to make hydrogen unless you're really getting very significant emissions reductions for something else. So because the need to green the grid itself for power generation is so great. And this, of course, is the case in Guyana as well, is at least for the next 5 to 10 years, there's so much unmet electricity demand and so much need to try and green that to make hydrogen, you'd either have to have a good buyer who's willing to pay that premium to get that hydrogen fuel, or you'd have to be substituting gray hydrogen in Guyana if it's being used right now, which I don't think it is, and to use as a fuel there. So I think, there's a lot of people want to supply hydrogen, but we're having trouble finding enough demand for hydrogen to justify its costs. So I think it's probably possible long term, but not short term.
So I wanted to direct.
Aaron's.
Yes.
Can I just throw something in now based on the discussions and so on, and just for colleagues to comment as needed, which is in Guyana at the street level, the real heavy discussion is not, what kind of project you're going to run. Is this going to be a terminal? Is it a pipeline? All these things. Yes, there's concerns with many of the environmental issues that Ulrich has pointed to, and I think there's due diligence that needs to be done there, both short-term and long-term. But the man, the woman on the street, what they're looking at, and this is a very risky situation, is, well, wait a minute, we're number one per capita in the world. We're going to have all this billions and so on, and I'm still paying gasoline prices through the roof. When Venezuela had oil and so on, it was the cheapest gasoline in the world, the cheapest electricity. We, of course, know where that went. And I'm on the streets in Guyana. Inflation is high. Cost of living is high. People are building more homes, more streets. When am I going to get lower cost? Because we are now all of a sudden the nirvana of energy production and security. Trinidad and Tobago went through this also. I think the one saving grace in Trinidad and Tobago was the prime minister at that time decided, we're not going to do all that stuff, but I'm going to guarantee the longevity of this economy by public education for everybody from school to university. That has been maintained, and I would argue that's probably the anchor of Trinidad's competitiveness even today. They tried the same with health and so on. That's a separate discussion. But the person on the street in Guyana is sitting there wondering, you want me to vote for you next year? There's all this. When am I going to see some tangible benefit? Is that unreasonable? I ask the experts.
So I'll go to Milton first because I wanted to come to him, and so maybe you can, reflect on your experience within the Venezuelan context to offer a response to Thomas and to integrate David's question into it.
Are we going to answer Thomas's question?
Yeah, and then reflect on David because so I was thinking about the victory of.
Let me take the question of Venezuela since I was there both at the U.S. Embassy and with Mobil, even pre-merger with Exxon. Venezuela had clean power. They had probably the largest hydroelectric dam in the Western Hemisphere, was generating 10,000 megawatt. And I think I mentioned before the aluminum thing. They were being fed, they were feeding those aluminum smelters and much more, They also had one project called Uribante Caparo that also was a hydroelectric project, not as big as the Guri Dam, the 10,000 megawatt. And they also had gas power plants or combined cycle in a place called Planta Centro. They had 4 different units of 400 megawatt each. So they did have enough of the clean power. And so Professor Thomas Singh is correct on that and that question. And definitely the issue became because of you have to take care of what you build. In other words, it's not always building a project. They're really maintaining the project and reinvesting and bringing new technologies so that these projects would not go away. In the case of, let's say, a hydroelectric dam, you got to take care of many issues there, and it was really very good for the country for many years, and there was even large industrial facilities built around that, both public and private, and that really made it quite good because they were also very close to a river, to the Orinoco River, so they could get some of these aluminum products and steel mill products and other products to get them out to the international market.
So thanks. I just want to note, Jesus Sanchez Maturelli sends us greetings from Mexico and is deeply appreciative. So, like I said, our audience is quite global, and I want to thank you, gentlemen, for being as effective. And perhaps as I'll use Jesus's question as a way to give everyone a chance. I've just looked up the clock and realized it's 11:58, and I know that's 2 minutes left in our conversation. So I don't. So the order of things, I suppose, Professor Brian, and then Milton, and then David, and then finally we'll give the deference to age and Dr. Trotz, you'll get the last word. So, Professor Brian.
Well, I will have to go back to the Trinidad example that David raised of how do you transfer to the populace through improved policy proposals. They did it in Trinidad with education, they did it with health, they did it with subsidized transportation. In other words, the rewards of that oil economy were transferred to the populace in that way. Now, not all of it has been successful. I mean, for example, there's a danger to subsidies if people get accustomed to subsidies, for example, in transportation. All right? The mistake that Trinidad made, for example, was to invest heavily in automobiles and buses when they could have used the money at that time to build a rapid rail transport system. 30 years ago, it was possible. So there is a danger to subsidies, but I think in terms of transferring to the populace, those things will have to be done. They will have to do it with education. They will have to do it with health. They'll have to do it with transportation, a number of areas to address the cost of living challenges faced by the citizens.
Milton, some last thoughts on the broad energy architecture, and then perhaps more specific.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, some of the key challenges is to balance the short-term economic growth with long-term sustainable developments. I think the gas to energy project is really going to cut cost power by about 50%. So that's good news. So there will be a reduction also of imports on fuel and what have you, and assist on the balance of payments, stimulate the manufacturing and other sectors, and provide opportunity for other export to export gas by products like cooking gas, fertilizers, whatever, and promote local employment, and at the end of the day is get the oil revenue that has provided for in-country infrastructure enhancements such as hospitals, schools, highways, hotels, and obviously a critical element will be to make sure that the human resources are there. And that was mentioned, there's enough training and what have you. You may have to bring foreign skilled workers and what have you to the marketplace until you get that going. Yeah.
David Gold. So you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. To use a shorthand, I would say first, raise incomes, don't subsidize products. I think the key there is to invest in what we've heard before, in education, in roads. I would say there ought to be much more capital available for small businesses so they can participate in the economy and allow people to work. The history of subsidizing products has been electricity and petroleum products. If you look at Mexico or Venezuela or Nigeria has been catastrophic for economies. Essentially, if you charge less than the cost of the product, refineries go out of business, and now Nigeria imports gasoline. Mexico is importing gasoline. They have 8 refineries in disrepair. Why? Because there's no money. Why? Because they had subsidized, they wanted to give away the gasoline. So raise incomes. I think one question for another webinar is this question of a basic income supplement. Should some share, not all of it, but some share of Guyana's national wealth, once you get out of cost recovery, go into some basic income supplement, which people could use either for school or they could use to start a business, not necessarily to buy cheap gasoline. And I think that's worth considering once you make sure you have enough money for national capital investment to build the infrastructure to grow the economy as a whole.
Yeah, this question of universal basic income has come up, and I'm sure we're going to see many variations of that in the political campaigns of various political parties. But it is definitely something that many of us have long felt that should be considered, and the question is, how should that be tailored within the Guyanese context? And this is something to come back to. Dr. Trotz, you get the last word.
Yeah, just like to end by reminding everyone that as we transition to net zero, there is going to be a demand for fossil fuels. This wouldn't happen overnight, and the GT project basically fills that gap. It's the best option in terms of that transformation. But as we do that in Guyana, I would urge that we don't lose sight of the lower hanging fruit and the opportunities for waste to energy projects, particularly given the agricultural base of our transformation. First and foremost, the rice industry No rice mill should be using any other fuel but rice husk to generate the energy. This not only that, the result of combustion of rice husk ash, rice husk ash, which is a commodity that is the best raw material for the manufacture of pure silica for this photovoltaic industry. And already we see our problems with the sugar industry. Maybe it's time we look at sugar rather as an energy industry with sugar as a byproduct, and to make that paradigm shift. That might be a better avenue, as Brazil has done with their sugar industry. And finally, the whole spectrum of agricultural wastes that are going to be generated as a result of our agricultural thrust for food security, an excellent way of dealing with an environmental problem and also a problem with energy for the industry. So I like to caution that we don't ignore these other opportunities for energy generation as we move along.
Okay, so Dr. David Lewis, you get to say thank you on our behalf, and we'll shut it down here.
Thank you all, and not to undermine the oil and gas anchor of the energy economy. I think what Ulrich was pointing to, and we've seen it in other markets, is that the opportunity for diversification using that anchor into many other areas, which are energy, environment, climate related, everything having to do with this new concept of the blue economy for a place like Guyana. I think those opportunities are immense. And as we tell our clients who all of a sudden come knocking, oh, I've heard Guyana is this great boom. I say, yes, but if you're thinking oil and gas, forget it, buddy. That's already been taken completely. You need to look at non-oil and gas energy areas, because that's really where the opportunity is. But thank you all. This has really been stimulating, as David just mentioned, food for thought for maybe a different webinar on these other subjects. And I think that's a great opportunity. Next month, Wednesday, September 11th, we will have episode 4, and actually quite timely with regards to what this new grid is going to look like and the utility and so on. That will be on innovation and technology. And as many of us have pointed out before, in 2024, there is no reason that a under 1 million population economy in the Western Hemisphere, like Guyana, should not be able to leverage and benefit from the top of the line innovation and technology in every aspect of its economy. And I think that's something to look forward to. So we will look out for the notices on that. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of August as summer. Stay safe, those of you that are in hurricane belt regions. We just missed on Ernesto, which is very good, but we're still in the middle of it and still have another month or two of that. So be safe, enjoy, and we look forward to seeing you all next month. Thank you all again.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
For a wonderful afternoon. I have to run off to teach. Thank you, colleagues. That was excellent.